Welcome back to the Mid-Year Mitch YouTube channel. In today's episode, we're sending off the 67 Roadster, and I wanted to do a full build overview to show you what we started with and what it looks like whenever it's going home to become a Restomod. So be sure to stick around. So day one of our thrash to build this 67 Roadster begins. So the goal is to get as far as we can basically in one day because I'm getting married on Saturday. So let's see how far we can get. We have a lot of good parts here. We have some pretty good doors. We have a great cowl section that was cut off at the rockers, so we need to put new rockers on it. We have pretty decent B pillars that need a little bit of repair. So we have a floor back here that needs a little bit of patchwork in the driver section and in the rocker over here. The firewall's in good shape minus the fact that it's missing the upper surround, but I have a new one from Dynamic. We have some door jamb fiberglass, and the rear clip needs a lot of work. So the goal here is first let's start off by building the bird cage, getting that all fit up, getting the doors fit up. Let's get that welded together. And then it's time to start making some fiberglass repairs. We need to get this floor right here patched up, work on getting this rocker spliced in and fixing that chunk of the firewall. We need to get all that wrapped up before we can install that in the bird cage. And then I need to figure out what to do with this rear clip. The outside fiberglass minus the quarter panels is in great shape. We need to put new quarters on it, but this top surround and the taillight panel are pretty nice. This thing had a pretty good fire, and that's what killed this car, unfortunately. This is our latest project. We got this in Michigan a couple years ago, and any good Corvette body project starts out with rebuilding the bird cage. So first I'm going to start off by removing the old rocker sections. This car was wrecked, and it was cut off right in the middle of the door jamb. So I removed those, and I'm going to go ahead and clean all the rust and straighten the metal out, just to make sure we have a good mating surface to weld new rockers on. Next, I take the cowl section of the bird cage and set it onto my bird cage table. This is a 66 Corvette frame that I've modified to build bird cages on, and I install new rockers on all my projects. I mock up the B pillars, and I'm putting the door hinges in place because we really need to get the doors installed to make sure that our cowl position is correct, as well as our B pillars to make sure the doors are at the right angle and they latch properly. After I check all my measurements and make sure the doors open and close properly, I start to weld in the hinge pillars onto the rockers. Now that I finished welding the hinge pillars into the rockers, I need to do some rust repair on the latch pillars. The latch pillar on the passenger side was cut up and it had some rust on the bottom. So I made some patch panels, welded all that together, drilled some holes so I could plug weld it to the rockers. And then I just put it onto the bird cage, make sure the door latches properly, clamp it in place, and weld it in. After I finish the steel bird cage, this is the body structure of the car. It's time to work on the fiberglass. We have a lot of fiberglass work to do. We have some panels that were cut up, so I need to splice in part of a floor pan onto the driver's side. And I start off by trimming it to fit. I scuff all the paint off, and I rough everything up with 36 grit so we can get good adhesion between the new fiberglass and the old fiberglass. I put foil tape on the backside of all the cracks and all my repair areas to keep everything tight, to keep the resin from dripping and just to make a good bond. I start off by doing the underside of the pan, just to make sure everything's nice and strong. And now I'm scuffing all the mating surfaces to get these bonding strips installed onto the cowl. So once I did the underside of the repairs, I was able to squeeze the firewall and the floor section into the car and glue it in place. With the front half of the floor and firewall installed on the car, it's time to jump to the back side of the car. The back end of the car had a fire. That's what ended its life, and I need to remove the fire damaged quarter panels, and part of the top deck. The little extensions that go by the deck lid were also burnt. So I removed those, and the floor was really fire damaged, so I ended up removing the entire floor from the rear deck of this. I have a lot of floors in stock, so it was pretty easy just to remove this section and just start fresh. I needed to splice these fiberglass rockers together, so I scuffed them. I hand laid fiberglass on the bird cage, and then I put them down on the bird cage to make sure they were nice and flush. I scuffed all the glue off of another floor, and I cleaned up some other repairs I had to make on the rear deck. I fiberglassed the rest of the rockers so I could get them ready to install, and I applied 3M 08115 panel adhesive to glue them in place. Next, I'm dry fitting the floor and the rear deck trying to get all that to work, and I had to fix one of the body mounts because it was damaged from the fire. Then I used a few tubes of panel adhesive to glue on the rear deck to the rear floor, and I mocked up the deck lid to make sure that the rear floor is in line with the doors. I scuffed up the quarter panel bonding strip, and I measured and cut these new deck extensions. This will finish up the back end of the car and remove the rest of the fire damage. I got those from Dynamic Corvettes, and I just slowly whittled them away. They made them a little long for me, so I made sure I had enough material. With them scuffed up, it was time to glue them in place. Now it's time to get the car ready to install quarter panels, so I'm removing the extra bit of quarter panels and glue that was left on the body to make sure the quarter panels sit high enough to line up with the doors. I pulled the door jamb fiberglass off and prepped all of that for some fiberglass repairs. Next, I scuffed a brand new pair of Vetmasters press molded quarter panels. I scuffed them with 36 grit, and then I also prepared the door jamb fiberglass to be glued in. I always wait to glue these in until after I dry fit the quarter panels in case I need to make any adjustments. I cleaned all of the extra glue off of the flange where the quarter panel meets. I hold them in place with the striker, and I glue those in place right before I glue the quarter panels on. And I'm working on dry fitting the quarter panels to make sure that we have a good gap. I applied more of my panel adhesive, and I clamped the quarter panel in place. And I have a little fixture that holds the quarter panels. It puts pressure on the back of the quarter panels, and I don't use any screws in this process. So I got them clamped in place, and that wraps up the cowl back of this car. Now I can remove all the clamps, and I can get my quarter panel assembly jig out of the way because it's time to work on the rear floor. The center of the floor is cut out, but that's okay because we're cutting the rest of the floor out because this car is going on a Roadster Shop Spec 7 chassis. So I cut around the wheel wells, and I drew a straight line across between the rear body mounts. I cut that whole tub out, got it out of the way, and now we can work on lifting this body up because it's time to do the shuffle. I always have to do shuffles with projects because this split window is on a Roadster Shop Spec 7 chassis that we need to borrow. So I had to remove the back end, pick up the body with my hoist, get the frame out of the way, roll the 67 back in, pull the body off of this car after I weaseled it in the garage, carefully pick it up. It was very flimsy once I removed that much floor. Then we set the body on the Roadster Shop chassis, and then I could put the birdcage on the stock chassis and put the back end on that and pile all the parts in. And now we have a Roadster Shop chassis under the 67. Now we need to cut the luggage support off the birdcage because we need to fit in a Dynamic Corvette rear floor kit. This is designed specifically for Roadster Shop Spec 7 chassis, so I had to go and trim to make sure that these tubs fit in flat. And then once I'm happy with that, I traced out all the locations where we need to scuff these floor pans with 36 grit to prepare them for gluing. And again, I always use 3M 08115 in this process whenever I glue them. So I had to scuff up all the mating surfaces and make sure that there weren't any raised lips. I had to splice in a little piece of fiberglass on the front floor pan, put my glue in place, and first I glued the center panel in. Then I glued in both wheel tubs, and I just made sure that they were sitting flush and there weren't any big gaps between all of the floor pieces. Now that I finished the floor repairs, we can jump onto the firewall. This firewall was missing the upper portion of the firewall, so I got a brand new one from Dynamic Corvettes. I scuffed them again with 36 grit. I also got firewall plenums and prepared those for gluing as well. Just had to do a little bit of trimming and a little bit of sanding. I also installed new number 1 body mounts onto these plenums. This little metal reinforcement is important. It just helps keep everything nice and strong whenever you bolt the body down. I applied my panel glue to all 3 pieces and clamped them in place. Next, I need to remove the doors because I don't have the door jamb fiberglass in behind the door hinges. I do this whenever I build bird cages so I can get in there and weld them fully. But now it's time to install these pieces because we need to glue the front end on the car, and the front end glues directly to this flange. So once I glue them in place, I put the door hinges on just to lock everything in. We can lock the doors back up to make sure the doors fit properly. Now it's time to dry fit the front end to make sure it fits this car. It was clearly on another car, but just because it fit that car doesn't mean it'll fit this one. So I have to remove all the extra adhesive that is on the body from whenever there was another front end on here. Make sure there aren't any big chunks of glue or fiberglass that are interfering. And I have to go and prep this front end to make sure it can fit. Now I'm using some fiberglass filler to build up the mating flange for the front end to make it meet the door, so that way we can get a nice transition between the door and the front end. Originally they would have done that with a lot thicker glue, but I find it's just better to build it up with a little bit of fiberglass filler. Then you can apply a thin coat of glue, make sure you get a nice even coat the whole way through, and then whenever you clamp the front end in place, it will stay exactly where you want it. Now this front end needs some patchwork around the cowl area, but we were able to get clamps in there and mount the core support to make sure everything fits properly. Now we need to mount the hood on the car because we have one more area to repair on the front end, the back area. Whenever they removed it from the last car, they cut it right through the front end, right around the wiper grill area. So I need to splice this panel in. We got to trim it up to make sure it fits. Nice tight gaps everywhere. And then I take some old pieces of fiberglass and I make some bonding strips out of them. I found some old bonding strips and then I made them fit. Removed all the adhesive off of them and I glued them in place just to make sure that we have a nice solid bond here. Once the glue is dry, I clean all the excess off and I scuff it with 36 grit to prepare for gluing the wiper section in. I typically don't like to make a splice like this, but this is what the owner wanted. He provided the front end and the parts, so that's what I did. I glued it all in place. And I scuffed my fiberglass repairs I did on the floor. We have to fiberglass the other side of it, and I just waited to the end just because I wanted to build the car. I scuffed all of the mating surfaces up just to remove the excess fiberglass and to make sure everything blends together nice. And then that's going to wrap it up for the 67. So got the shop cleared out and we have it in the center of the floor and it's ready to pick up, move on to its next chassis. So if you're not familiar with this car, I started this project, I believe mid-June. Right before the wedding, I started doing the birdcage work. I had a marathon thrash to get as much done on it as I could. And then we started putting her back together. All these parts I got in Michigan a couple years ago. The back end and the birdcage pieces. I had the doors, but we put her together. He gave me a deck lid, he got this front end to Carlisle, and he had this hood laying around. So between all that stuff, we put together a nice 67 Roadster. Has brand new quarter panels from Vetmasters, and it's just a old 67 that's been burnt and been sitting off the road for a very, very long time. So I'm happy with the way this old girl turned out. Now, she's gonna need body work. All these seams need done. It's gonna need to have the paint stripped off, and there's a couple probably cracks and bumps in the front end. Needs to be finished up, but these guys are more than capable. They've done this for a very long time, so this won't be hard for them to do. Then inside the car, we have a brand new dynamic Corvette rear tub kit for the Roadster shop chassis, specifically the convertibles. They give you some extra room with these little divots for the convertible top. We did a bunch of floor work to this thing, patched in some pieces, and it turned out nice. It's gonna need a whole bunch of work. You can see this tunnel needs to be modified, but they're gonna put an automatic in this that's a lot bigger than the original transmission. So this tunnel is gonna get all sorts of modified. But this is a nice, solid little car. And again, it's not perfect, but they can run with it and finish up the body work, and it'll be a really, really nice car. So I'm always excited to send them off. But that's gonna do it for this video. If you enjoyed, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. I hope you guys enjoyed this series. It was a lot of fun to put this car together, and it's always good to see a car go home and see what it turns into, because it's not gonna look like what it does for much longer. It's gonna be finished up really nice. It's gonna have beautiful paint, beautiful interior, and it's gonna probably hit the Restomod market at the auction at some point in the next few years. Next week, we're gonna be jumping back on the 63 split window here. We have a lot of work to do to get this car pretty much to the same condition that 67 Roadster left. So we have a lot of work to do, and I'll catch you guys later.